Imagine declaring a total, absolute military victory at the exact same moment you basically hand over the keys to the global economy. Welcome to the Clarin Horatio Daily World Brief, available at clarinhoratio.com. Today is June 23, 2026. We are starting today with the incredibly complex and, frankly, messy aftermath of the U.S.-Iran war.
Because on June 17th, an agreement was signed at the Palace of Versailles that triggered a sudden reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to global shipping. The maritime intelligence data is already confirming the physical reality of this deal. We have seen at least 172 vessels cross the strait just since June 18.
And that sudden flow of traffic is obviously easing global energy costs. It lowers shipping risks dramatically. We're actually already seeing Brent crude push down to its lowest level since the conflict began. But the specific terms of this agreement and the stories being told about it in Washington are completely contradictory.
The primary mechanism driving this sudden drop in oil prices is a 60-day emergency waiver issued by the U.S. Treasury. We have to look closely at what this waiver actually does, because it explicitly allows Iran to sell crude oil and petrochemicals in U.S. dollars.
Which essentially dismantles the central pillars of a decades-long economic embargo. By granting this temporary license, Iranian oil can now legally be imported directly into the United States.
More importantly for Tehran, it unlocks the global banking transactions and insurance networks that have historically choked off their economy. The stated exchange for this massive economic relief is that Tehran keeps the Strait of Hormuz open to your shipping.
Along with the claim that they will allow International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, nuclear inspectors back into the country. But I need to stop you there and look at this timeline. We are giving them sweeping sanctions waivers after they successfully choked off the Strait of Hormuz.
The U.S. administration is certainly framing this as a win. President Trump has publicly claimed total and complete victory.
While Vice President J.D. Vance asserted that discussions with the IAEA were progressing so rapidly that inspectors could be returning to Iranian nuclear sites immediately.
But the reality on the ground actively contradicts those public statements from Washington. Iran's foreign ministry issued an immediate denial regarding the nuclear inspectors. They explicitly stated there are no new commitments whatsoever regarding nuclear inspections.
They went even further and clarified that they have absolutely no plans to allow inspectors to access the specific nuclear sites that were bombed by the U.S. and Israel last year.
Any engagement with UN inspectors, according to Tehran, will only take place under existing procedures that are set by their own parliament and their Supreme National Security Council. So you have the U.S. administration insisting Iran has agreed to major weapons inspections,
while the public posture from Iran indicates a stark refusal to concede access to the most sensitive sites. The disconnect here is staggering. The U.S. administration is declaring absolute military victory to the domestic public,
simultaneously granting these sweeping sanctions waivers, allowing Iran to trade in U.S. dollars and unfreezing international banking networks.
And this is all happening immediately after Iran successfully closed a vital global economic choke point. Declaring total victory while handing over massive economic concessions to a nation that just demonstrated its ability to hold global shipping hostage, it raises serious questions about who actually holds the leverage in this dynamic.
It illustrates a massive gap between diplomatic rhetoric and geopolitical reality. The U.S. achieved a reopening of the strait, which was economically necessary to stabilize global markets and household energy costs.
However, the price of that reopening was abandoning a long-standing strategy of severe economic isolation. By forcing the conflict to a point where Iran felt compelled to close the strait, the U.S. administration essentially gave Iran the exact leverage it needed to demand the lifting of sanctions.
The contradiction between the triumphant messaging in Washington and the concrete economic gains secured by Tehran is going to shape the balance of power in the Middle East for the foreseeable future.
We are looking at a situation where the government is sacrificing long-term strategy for a short-term, immediate win. You do not even have to look overseas to see that exact same short-term savings, long-term disaster mindset. Look at what is happening right now with our own federal climate data.
Following the firing of federal climate scientists by the Trump administration in early 2025, former National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration employees have had to independently resurrect the shuttered climate.gov site.
They have brought it back online as a privately funded resource called climate.us. You now have scientists working voluntarily to vet the content for accuracy, just trying to restore public access to scientifically rigorous information concerning heat waves, storms, and sea level rise.
This grassroots data rescue points to a profound institutional crisis unfolding within the government. In 2025 alone, the federal government lost 10,000 STEM workers. These are individuals with advanced degrees in science, technology, engineering, math, and health.
That represents an unprecedented brain drain. We are looking at the sudden loss of hundreds of years of collective expertise. When you lose that many scientists, you lose institutional memory.
Experts warn that rebuilding this knowledge base will take generations. This loss impacts critical everyday functions, everything from regulating the nuclear industry to monitoring how industrial chemicals and extreme heat harm human health.
And the consequences of dismantling public science are incredibly tangible for you, especially if you live near the coast. The National Science Foundation recently moved to dismantle the Ocean Observatories initiative.
This is a $368 million deep-sea monitoring system that is absolutely vital for climate research and weather forecasting. The NSF planned to shut it down to save $48 million in annual operating costs.
Following unanimous bipartisan Senate pushback on June 17th, the NSF did pause the dismantling on June 18th.
The legislative intervention happened, but it came too late to prevent significant operational damage. 6 of the 7 deep-sea moorings off the Oregon and Washington coasts had already been pulled from the water before the pause went into effect.
These are not just abstract scientific instruments collecting data for academic papers. Meteorologists and commercial fishermen rely on this massive network of underwater sensors and buoys for real-time weather and wave conditions.
These sensors track marine heat waves. They monitor ocean current stability. Most critically, they are designed to detect tsunamis.
I mean, it is wild when you think about it. Unilaterally dismantling an early warning tsunami system to save $48 million is literally like ripping the smoke detectors out of your living room because you want to save a few cents on your electricity bill.
The physical safety of coastal populations is directly compromised when those sensors are removed. Furthermore, you cannot just drop them back in the water tomorrow.
Scheduling the specialized research vessels required to redeploy these massive underwater moorings normally requires a full year's notice. The vulnerability is immediate and the fix is distant. For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinhoratio.com.
The willingness to bypass safety protocols for the sake of cost-cutting or deregulation extends far beyond government agencies. We are seeing the physical public safety of citizens being compromised by executive shortcuts in the private sector as well, specifically in the realm of autonomous technology.
We saw the lethal consequence of this on Friday, June 19th in Texas. A Tesla Model 3 failed to turn at an intersection, sped off the road at a high rate of speed, and crashed directly into a house. A 76-year-old woman who was inside her home was struck and killed.
The driver survived, was not intoxicated, and explicitly told investigators that the vehicle was operating with an automated driving assistance system engaged at the time of the crash.
The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has launched a special crash investigation into this incident. This is the most in-depth and detailed form of inquiry the agency conducts, completely separate from the local police investigation.
It is designed specifically to gather data on crashes involving emerging technology. In response to this event, Democratic Senators Edward Markey and Richard Blumenthal are demanding probes into the safety risks of Tesla's full self-driving technology.
They point out that the claims regarding this technology being safer than human driving are based on heavily misleading data analysis. For example, comparing brand new vehicles equipped with the latest sensors to the entire, much older U.S. vehicle fleet.
And relying on incomplete crash data to justify those safety records. The scope of this problem extends beyond a single manufacturer, though. Waymo also recently had to recall thousands of its autonomous cars in Texas because the vehicles were failing to navigate flooded roads.
What we are witnessing here is the privatization of public safety. This is not a standard traffic accident where 2 human drivers make errors on a public road. A grandmother was killed in her own living room by a 2-ton machine running experimental software.
Citizens have effectively been transformed into non-consensual participants in the beta testing of autonomous robotics. The ethical stakes are enormous here.
When companies deploy autonomous vehicles that still require human intervention to prevent fatal errors, the public is forced to bear the physical risk of corporate research and development.
The testing environment is not a closed track. It is your neighborhood. It is civic space. And the regulatory apparatus, as we see with the NHTSA investigation, is largely reactive.
It responds after the fatal failure occurs, investigating the wreckage rather than preemptively enforcing safety standards before the technology is unleashed on public streets. We are seeing technology deployed with a shocking disregard for human life.
And when we look globally, we see a similar dynamic in public health. where immense resources are mobilized to protect a select few, while massive lethal threats are left to devastate vulnerable populations.
Moving to the African continent, the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo has severely escalated. As of late June, officials have confirmed over 1,000 cases and 267 deaths.
The World Health Organization confirms this is the highest number of confirmed cases in the first month of any Ebola outbreak in Africa. The situation is uniquely volatile because the Bundibugyo Ebola virus has spread into the crowded displacement camps in war-torn eastern Congo.
The International Organization for Migration confirmed cases within these specific camps, where the population is already exceptionally vulnerable due to ongoing conflict and a complete lack of basic infrastructure.
The public health response requires a massive, immediate expansion just to keep pace with the virus in these dense, fragile environments.
Now contrast the desperate lack of resources in the DRC with the geopolitical friction occurring simultaneously in Kenya. On June 23, the Kenyan health minister officially halted the construction of a secret, U.S.-backed Ebola quarantine facility at Laikipia Air Base.
The government had previously ignored court orders to suspend the construction, which led to intense public protests that resulted in 3 deaths. The civic outrage in Kenya stems directly from the purpose and the extreme secrecy of the facility.
This 50-bed isolation center, which was going to be managed by U.S. medical staff, was being built exclusively to treat U.S. nationals should they contract Ebola. Kenya does not share a border with the DRC and has never recorded a single case of Ebola in its history.
The Kenyan public was deeply concerned about the prospect of infected foreign patients being deliberately airlifted into their territory. Think about the logistics required here.
Enormous Western resources were mobilized to build a private VIP medical fortress in a neighboring country. Meanwhile, thousands of vulnerable people in Congolese displacement camps are bearing the brunt of a lethal, rapidly expanding outbreak.
The mobilization of funds, international logistics, and military base access was achieved quietly to protect foreign nationals, while the actual epicenter of the crisis struggles to secure the basic public health infrastructure needed to save local populations.
It represents a profound moral whiplash. The global health response is visibly fractured along lines of nationality and wealth. The effort to build a dedicated, secure facility for potential future cases among U.S. citizens required significant diplomatic and financial leverage.
Applying that exact same leverage to the active outbreak in the DRC could arguably alter the trajectory of the disease. Instead, the focus was on establishing a secure enclave, which ended up sparking fatal unrest in a country that had no active cases to begin with.
Today's stories reflect distinct pressures moving in very different directions. We are seeing the fragility of international agreements, where treaties are signed for immediate economic relief, while the core disputes over nuclear inspections remain entirely unresolved and actively denied.
We are watching the deliberate dismantling of institutional science, leaving coastal communities blind to oceanic threats just to save a fraction of the federal budget.
We are observing the unkept promises of autonomous technology, where the rush to deploy software results in lethal consequences for people simply sitting in their homes.
And we are witnessing stark inequalities in global health, where VIP medical bunkers are prioritized over funding the frontline response in displacement camps. Across all these events, there is a distinct reliance on prioritizing branding and public relations over managing actual reality.
Declaring a total military victory does not change the physical fact that massive economic sanctions were lifted. Calling software full self-driving does not prevent a car from failing to turn and crashing into a house.
And building a secret medical facility on an airbase does not stop a virus from spreading through a displaced population.
When governments and corporations prioritize public relations over reality, the inevitable failures are passed down to you. Whether it's claiming a war is won, branding a lethal machine as autonomous, or hiding a quarantine facility on a military base, the branding eventually meets the real world. The lingering question you have to ponder is this: when the facts on the ground finally break through the manufactured narratives, who actually pays the price? Today is June 23, 2026. For more Daily World Bruce and classic audiobooks, visit clarinarratio.com.